Historical traces indicate that past explorers referred to the object of their efforts as such things as the grand awakening, the glorious liberation, the supreme discovery. But one band has looked upon life as an interesting and challenging journey through an extensive range of ever-changing mountains, peaks, and valleys, with many complex turns and uncertain trails, a constant series of ups and downs, culminating in what they described in terms related to consciousness as emerging from this ragged, jagged landscape and finally coming out into the great clearing. Local strangeness, another look. On this planet, it is clear that a creature's intelligence can be measured by its ability to adapt. But when it comes to that singular feature of man, the most intelligent of them all, his mind, the matter becomes less clear and certain. The true hero in the mystical sense is one whose consciousness ultimately is in no conflict with the environment. A successful adventure worthy of being described as that which cannot be described, since there is no opposing force off of which to bounce the attempted depiction. Query: why would any intelligent man ever listen to anyone dumber than he is? And if he did, where would he get off, get the nerve, get the stupidity to then criticize them? Dialogue played in one of the major city keys. Everybody loves the idea of a great conspiracy. Why? Because there is one. Well, who's running it? No one knows. That's why it's so popular. At his unknown feast and banquet of illumination, the knowing king to himself would sing, "Bring me the head of a hero on a sword. Bring me the head of a hero on my own head." Alertness and the greatest of care should both be exercised in the presence of deceased heroes. Those who think of science and religion in conflict, or likewise mythology and technology, remain the intellectual foot soldiers in the grand extravaganza life so aptly staged. The original two-edged sword. Being civilized makes men civil. Being civilized makes men crazy. Over a period of time and uncommon private personal efforts, a man finally asked himself, what would be the distinguishing characteristic of a true warrior? Strength, bravery, intelligence, compassion, devotion to duty? And while pondering the question, it suddenly struck him that all of the possibilities he'd considered would fit within the ability to control one's consciousness. Seeing things coming to a head, one man thought, just because you're going bald is no reason to go deaf. One day a mystic took his eldest son aside and said to him, "Trying to pursue this path has got to be, absolutely, the loneliest, most thankless thing possible." And the kid responded, "Yeah, ain't it great?" And the old man replied, "Yeah, I was just checking." The history of man, the intellectual creature. Short version. Once you have a mind, you're right off dumb. Once men lived by feeling alone. Then came the mind. Now they live by both. And nothing is as simple as twice was. On the mystical warrior's tricky and arduous trek to the great clearing, he eventually realizes the need to take along some goodwill. The title of the lecture was Specific Facts You Can Absolutely Count On. And the speaker presented this as one of them, quoting, "People who resort to using statistics to prove some point or the other never have any personal understanding of the matter involved." And momentarily added, "This is true at least 98% of the time." Today's brand new, unknown historical fact. All psychological discussions of man are by and large just bullshit for one good, simple reason, and that is because, in relative reference, his psychology is by and large just that. In expanded terms, two peoples talk to themselves, the dumb and the dead. Trees learn nothing from pondering their roots till soil nutrition they comprehend. Those angry over the sins of man serve as hothouses for the apparent virus. A necessary local arrangement, reflected one man, but why not let it be down on Main Street and not in thee? Human intelligence and matters related to life in space. With local conditions as the primary life support mothership, man's mind is the docking mechanism whereby he connects thereto and survives. Somewhere along the intricate, misty path into the great clearing, everyone becomes stupid, inept, and confused anew. Thus, when it hits, you can feel cheerful and knowing you're not yet lost. Though unrealized even by their leaders, all religions are conspiracies, contrivances constructed to help control potential outbursts of mysticism and increased awareness. One man covered the subject of heroes with the sun in 4 words: have none, be one. In lieu of other prey, one man kept himself in his gun sights. In lieu of a wounded animal, one man carried himself on the fender of his vehicle. Ordinary attention is founded on physical aggression and the drive to survive, while a mystic's version rests on understanding, compassion, and goodwill. Stomachs, simple. But is that any reason for minds to follow suit? Anger befits only 2 classes of people, the simple and those who died while asleep. Things seem different laying down than they do standing up. At a fairly early stage in oceanic exploration, ship captains, in their desire not to wreck, sink, or fall off the edge of the earth, appropriated from mystics the notion of steady as she goes. In a warrior's camp prevailed this thought: talk here at worst is a distraction, and at best a waste of time. History, presumed non-fiction myths. There is no great adventure while you're on autopilot. Okay, here's how the hierarchy progresses. First, simple-minded, then more complex-minded, and finally, plain-minded. The thing that men call reality is made up of mostly essential stuff. When read aright, the energy in human genetics presents the leading edge of information. Although he never mentioned it to anyone, one warrior who had had the great experience thought to himself, once you're with it face to face, about all you can do is say, I'd sure like to shake your hand. It's hard to start a whole new parade. There is no punchline to a mystic's life. While the mystical traditions could be said to be for the purpose of assisting the few in seeing the truth, they could also be said to be for the purpose of helping them not. It's hard to start a whole new parade. The true traveler is he who can go and never return. Too soon, it's too late. The mind is wrinkled and soiled. Look, the cleaners, the agent of consciousness, just there, just up ahead. The adventure worthy of man is the one of the spirit, that is, the one that takes him to the highest point in his own neural system. The true traveler is he who goes and never returns. There is, without it being written blatantly, and without it even being heretofore open to commonly known analyzation, even speculation, but within all of the mystical traditions, and in fact, in all the religions, if you'd like to look upon them as even the cliff notes of mysticism, but even within those, you do not find this, that this I'm referring to is a feeling, a sensation that mystics, those attempting to do something extraordinary, a feeling that they share in common at a superficial level with many other people. Poets would be artists, oftentimes just ordinary people who do not have the particular means to express it. And that is the feeling that in the midst of life somewhere you have gone astray. You have lost your way on the path. Now, ordinary people feel that, and it generally, about the only thing it amounts to is a sign that menopause is coming on, male and female. Hormones are wearing down. Well, it's a fact. Those of you that's old enough, you laugh in a certain way if you laughed at all, and those of you who are not old enough yet, laugh out of a certain amount of fear, assuming that you were listening at all, which is not the purpose. But there is that quite ordinary feeling, the best probably pronouncement of it, not that it's not open to a further interpretation, but is the opening strains of Dante's Inferno about just in the midst of life, in the wood, it was like things, they took a wrong path. That is not unusual, and I'm not going to stay there because quite ordinary people, country and western songwriters, poets, and as I said, just quite ordinary people can hit that age when hormones begin to wear out a little, and they get the feeling of extremely surprising and upsetting blahs, at the very least. Just that old feeling, that I say old feeling in a historical sense, figuratively speaking, that men have gone, what's the purpose in life? And they normally have to go ahead and get over it. Ordinary people, they got their choice, either get over it or don't. So. But going deeper with this now, there is a quite common, or there is within the non-ordinary, the same feeling. It comes upon people, and everyone, for all intents and purposes, that pursues this kind of activity far enough, comes upon a higher level of this feeling of reaching some. Let's take my opening story tonight. That besides all the other descriptions that have been made in the mystical traditions, I put it to you that there was a band of mystics one time that described the whole affair, if you picture it, as life as a journey, an adventure, something challenging, but in their case, the description was more geographical, that they were presenting it in physical terms, that it is you find yourself going through a continuing series, ever shifting, changing the landscape itself, but of through mountains. And sometimes you go down in valleys, but it was always that the range kept going on, the mountain range. You might go down them, but then you went up. And it was hairpin curves, uncertain trails. There was a constant. Could be attractive. Their description was, according to me, challenging, interesting. And that the whole point was, based upon that same kind of description, is that one day, after all of this, they didn't register any complaints. They started out saying it was interesting and challenging because it was not like you're out in a desert, bereft of any interesting geographical aspects. But imagine if you went for years, 30 or 40 years where it was, in an unknown mountain range, ups, downs, around curves, and this way and that way, and sometimes having to find your own path, trying to make a new one. But then culminating, and we're talking about mystical groups, the tradition of pursuing some extraordinary course, that the day comes that they leave the landscape. And it's like you've been going around a mountain and you come down the side, maybe down in a valley, and unexpectedly, rather than going back up other mountains, suddenly it's as though it opens up, and it's they called it the Great Clearing. Somewhere in the midst of that, it seems to be quite expected that even those who have apparently spent a great deal of time and effort pursuing an extraordinary path, it's as though they one day go around a small little mountain or a little hillock, a boulder, and suddenly feel as though they are stupid and new. That they have, and it's not just lost your way in that ordinary poetic sense of ordinary people. I've already given them their due. It is not in the sense of the would-be mystical warrior, the traditionalist. It is not hormonal. That is not the basis of it. Any more than life is, of course. But it is that you feel, after all this effort, after in certain ways coming to extraordinary grips with life, with the ordinary terrain of life, it's as though just one day you go around a small boulder, just minding your own business, doing what you thought was the best efforts, making your best efforts, and suddenly it's as though you have, it's not just gone backwards, but it's like you lost some sort of flavor to life, some sort of ability. I've heard it put as crudely as people say, I suddenly feel like I can't even think anymore. Now recall, we're not talking about ordinary people now, because ordinary people can say that is part of being alive. But it's people who have begun to have some conception, getting closer to the Great Clearing. And then it's though totally undeserved, totally out of what would be the expected context. It's like I become stupid, unproductive, uncreative, non-insightful, but on some kind of new level, which I know is oxymoronical, because you don't feel it. The people do not feel as though it's an improvement. In that sense, the juxtaposition is so bad you can't even say it is a non-improvement. It's just there is no expected context verbally in which to place this. As I said, the reality of this is throughout religion, myths, legends, fairy tales, but it is not read this way by ordinary people, because ordinary people are not on any particular individual journey. They're not striving after some real adventure, the only one being the internal one. Not to understand that we're not talking about the kinds of adventures that are available to the body. That's another ordinary run of affairs. But those who are pursuing what is the adventure worthy of man is the internal one. used to be called of the Spirit, and I simply translate it into better specific terms, the Spirit being the highest possible point in a man's nervous system. There have been, all of you are familiar enough, I could start pulling out examples. There have been notations made of this without the people being involved necessarily having any notion of what they were talking about. They just knew that something was motivating them to make such observations. But it's devoting, I'm getting to is it is a kind of devotion, once you understand it, of your energy to the right place. Buddha, attempting to describe proper effort, at least those after him, the interpretation, strung out into all sorts of things, all the way from all that was actually necessary would be right kind of thought, but then into right kind of employment, right kind of all sorts of things, family life. All of these liberations, and then into Christianity, I'm sure it's a common one. It's even used in the secular world for other would-be allegorical reasons, but the rendering to Caesar and the rendering to the gods. Hold both of those in mind. That and the Buddha and Confucius had his own ones about what would be a good citizen, what would be a good leader. And I suggest you he would be using things such as leader in the same sense I use the king in these stories I make up, having to do with the higher part of one's nervous system, what would seem to be the seat of power when you start out. And you don't have to look far to identify your own little sawed-off monarch, because his name is me. Yes, that's right, me. Or for those of you, if that word is too long, I. I have already described for you in real plain point-blank terms that all of the ideas, the liberation of the mind, the great awakening, the supreme illumination, whatever they call it, the experience itself should not actually be soiled by putting descriptions, because all the things you say is it's non-describable. But everything up until that 1 second, right up to it, you can describe. And I have described it to you that all of it, all of the attempts, all of the prayers, the fasting, the meditations, is the attempt to control one's awareness. The relationship, what that has to do with the feeling that people experience that I'm losing it. Or that when I started out, sometimes I look back now, something seems to happen, I look back now, some people will say, and that I'm not as smart as I used to be. I don't even think in the same way. I don't feel, sometimes I have the same kind of joie de vivre in the ordinary sense that I used to have. It is not. Well, let me skip the encouragement for a second. No. Encouragement is so cheap and useless. Information to the alert is of much more interest. Every mystical tradition, religions at a lesser level, are all trying to do one thing. The whole notion of God, of a supreme, unchanging, omnipotent being, force, is one thing, and that's the attempt internally to find a stable place to hold something and it not change. And an ordinary man, the nervous system is arranged, the way in which we are plugged into the mothership of local conditions is arranged in such a way that actually being under some control to stop and tell the truth is impossible. All right, now we got that out of the way. Then you've got to reconsider what words do to that which is possible. You have had people throughout history that would appear to, by all other accounts, to be sane, intelligent people who underwent all sorts of questionable, strenuous, sometimes dangerous, physically speaking, rituals and disciplines, starving themselves, torturing themselves, beating themselves with whips, putting rocks in their shoes, putting tacks in their shoes, setting the hairs on their back on fire, and then we lay rotten. A constant, and of a more subtle level, in one sense, is the attempt to continually suffer, not physically, but the internal suffering, which normally comes out as people attempting to do charitable work. That you attempt to continually feel, and the way that most people get a sensation of it being an intense or a more intense feeling is some form of suffering. And if you don't do it yourself, that is, if you're not feeling sorry for yourself, you do charity work, which I'm translating the physical charity work now into something else, into the reality behind it, and that is what is normally referred to as sympathy. It is the attempt for people to walk around, it's a variation of attempting to walk around and always remember, and I can just start making them up, there's been many scores of descriptions of a person who attempts to walk around once they get some idea, even if they don't know how to describe it, but they know that they hear an idea such as, it would be good if you remembered that God loves you, or that Allah loves you, or that the Master of the universe loves you, whatever it is. And the right kind of people hear that, and it's to varying degrees, some of the ordinarily religious who would not attempt any sort of extraordinary internal journey, but they still hear the idea and go, yes. It then gets translated into things that if you were as dumb and simple-minded as most people, then you could laugh and scoff at it, which just shows the level of your intelligence. To wit, people carrying around a drawing of Jesus. Buddhists, Hindus carrying around a photograph, or they even get tattoos supposedly of one of the gods or a symbol. And you can laugh and think, how outdated. All of this can be, to varying degrees, crude, less crude, but it's an attempt for a person to stabilize their awareness. Put very simply, they attempt to think of one thing all of the time. If you get certain people to try that, or some of them can just hear it and go, yes, that is it. You are exactly right. Everything that all the religions and all the mystical traditions teach that would be appropriate for a successful practitioner of that religion or a follower of that tradition. Compassion, love for your fellow man, lack of greed, lack of hubris, lack of pride. It doesn't matter whatever they describe as being a better person. All of that can be lumped into one thing. It would be a person who had some control over their consciousness. I know it can sound to be a little white British to people who believe that they must have rye and pumpernickel. But that's why I went to some effort several nights, tapings ago, to point out the difficulty that ordinary people proclaim, the leaders, ordinary religious people, and even the leaders, that proclaim that's impossible to actually fulfill the tenets of their religion, whatever it is. In other words, you cannot actually be a good Christian. You cannot actually be a Jew, and etc. And I pointed out that, well, that's not exactly a fair detailing of the situation, because you can. But what do they attribute the lack of their ability to fulfill the requirements of being a better person, which would be to be a Buddhist or a Hindu? They always say that there is something holding man back, and the very simplistic version is always a evil force, a Satan, a anti-God, the Hindu god of destruction. One of the parts of the Trinity holding up the universe gets the upper hand, it gets out of balance, but it's always that there is something holding man back. Now, if we move that into the level at which I'm describing it, the attempt of all of it, the actual attempt to be a Christian, the whole point of it, if the tempo was increased, if the stakes could be raised, to be a Christian, to be a Jew, to be a Buddhist, all that's the same thing. It would be to be more conscious. It would be to be more in control of your intellectual awareness. That would be the first stage, because if you could do that, then you could no longer even accept the story, the telling that you cannot be a Christian because of some external force. Many people, on their own, they either hear a hint of it, or it doesn't matter how, but can immediately latch on to what I said when they hear the idea that you would be much better off, that the whole way to get going on this extraordinary journey, everything you've been looking for, is first off, you've got to grab your attention and hold that son of a bitch. You cannot convince anybody there to be, well, you can't. And if you could, you wouldn't have done anything, because you'd have been too stupid to even know what I'm talking about, to try and convince somebody, and etc. It's known as JP, or JSP, justice still prevailing. You cannot convince somebody, there's no way to prove this. Some people immediately hear it, more or less, and go, yes, that is it. Then you're left with, after you can feel the reality of it, but some of you can't. And after that, you're left with, it may take you 2 weeks, it may take you 20 years. And you realize, I can't remember to do it. Now we're getting around, in case you thought I'd actually change the main road, to the feeling of being stupider than ever. Being dumber than you used to be. After all this effort. All a person has to do is try and stabilize their attention, just to hold their attention continually. And you describe it to somebody, or they hear it, and they go, that sounds right. Is that what you're talking about? And I say, if you could just hold your attention, just somewhere in you, hold a piece in reserve. And you can get somebody, it almost sounds like parlor tricks, except ordinary people, if they hear it for the first time, some people get absolutely amazed and want to take notes. Of course, those that do wander out and never understand what it was. But the thing is, if you have any ability, any potential, you know for a fact that you could, to make it sound like a little trick, that right now I'm going to turn around with my right hand, pick up that cup, and I'll continue to talk, or I'll look off like I'm thinking. I'll make it a little easier, like I'm pondering what to do. But in all this time, I'm going to tell you in advance, I'm going to hold a piece of my mental activity, and do nothing but remember that I told you I was going to hold a piece of it. You follow? Well, I can go ahead and talk. What I'm going to say is, all right, I'm about to do it, and I'm going to pick up the cup. That's what I'm going to say, but I'm telling you beforehand, I'm going to say that, but at the same time, there's going to be a piece of my intellect that's not going to say that. There's going to be a piece of my intellect that's just going to be aware of the fact that I'm telling you that that's what I'm about to do. The point of this being that you can do two things at once. Boy, big deal. God, does this take somebody with the intellectual wherewithal of who? All right, I'm going to... You can do it. And it's simply a person can do it and go, yeah, you're right. By all accounts, by all the experience of humanity thus far, even the extraordinary few, it takes a long time for a person to reach that stage of thinking, Jesus, I'm dumber than ever. I would like to offer you one description of this new level of stupidity. It's after having, and it's not that you are stupid when it happens, but it's that you have been pursuing a general course for many years. And it can be, I'm talking about many years. There have been people who have sat in monasteries, devoted their life, not like most people under our conditions that just sort of do it, at least visually, part-time. People who had devoted 24 hours a day for 30 years. And one day they stand and go, they don't know what to say, but they're saying just what I've gone ahead and described for you. And they go, this has been the greatest 30 years of my life, except suddenly I feel like I'm stupider than I was the day I walked in here. And yet they know something's not right. What's not right is you reach the point, whether you like my term or whether you have yet to come up with your own description, that internally, if you could be the Buddha, the Christ, if you could hold one piece that just stayed there, everything else, let's put it in nice everyday mystical terms, everything else would fall into place. Or everything else would take care of itself. And if you ever think that, I'll tell you in advance, you have hit a home run. If you could, once you know what it is, and if you don't know what it is, it's sort of meaningless. When you can have a piece of your awareness that does not move, just does not move, and it can just stand still, there is nothing else to say. You no longer have any problem. There's not a matter of stupidity. There's not a matter of being compassionate. There's not a matter of feeling this way or that way. There's not a matter of, there's no matter of any nature that is polarized. The stupidity is, what can I do to bring this about? What can I do to hold this? And now you have 3 or 4 or 5,000 years, according to whichever one you want version, of people attempting to do this, all the way from, as I said, it's hidden in fairy tales and cruder societies, it's hidden in hieroglyphics, it's written in cartoon stick figures and graves, mausoleums. It is obviously threaded throughout all the world's religions. And it ends up, all of these prayers, all of these symbolic attempted submissions to some great force, commonly known as God. That's what they end up saying. And what do they attribute to God? What's the first thing? You know what they attribute to God? Stable consciousness. Well, they call it something else. They call it infinity. In the Western world, coming out of the Old Testament, I believe it is God, the same today, yesterday, and tomorrow. And symbolically, you have it in all of the Hindu scriptures and Buddhism and everywhere, the circles, the ideas of a reincarnation, but the symbolic drawings all over the world, all of the tales have to do with the ultimate idea of a supreme being, a supreme force, is something that is unchanging. At a very simplistic level, I might point out, nowadays it would be called psychological level, you could make an argument that the idea of God, if you were an ordinary modern person with no religious leanings, you could say, well, the whole idea of God and the idea of Him being infinite and unchanging and always there is just, it's a subconscious longing for a strong father figure, which I know might sound up to date and modern unless you had to read certain 3,000-year-old Mideastern myths and tales about flying gods and goddesses. it is not just a longing for a great father figure. It is, for those who understand it, it is the feeling of, it is the awareness that there is only one force that is worthy of even thinking about. There's only one adventure. There's only one deed. There's only one effort. And it takes people usually a lifetime to come up with any notion of what it is. They may have adopted somebody else's description, which doesn't mean anything. All that means is you're sitting on the bus riding in somebody else's lap. I mean, it may be who you consider to be a great mystical hero of some kind, but you don't have your own seat. But the day comes when you understand, and I'm just putting the words on it for you, that the whole point is that everything that all these other people have tried to do, everything that all the Jesuses and Moseses and Zoroasters and everybody talked about, is they were trying to, once they knew what it was, you can do it right this second. You can hold your attention. You can be unmoving. You can be God in that crude sense. That here you are right this second, you're unchanging. Because once you've got a taste of it, in a sense it is unchanging. Let us say that you can only do it once every 5 years. At least be aware of this fact. If you can do it tonight, for a long enough period of time that you're aware of it again, you know what it is. It's the same feeling of 5 years ago. You understand, yep, this is it. That's why I lasted this long. That's what keeps me going. Of course, then there's another way, in case you need it to feel stupid, is to think, how come I can go 5 years between times? How can I be so stupid when I know what it is? You then, I want to refer you back to, it's not just childish and other aspects of psychological childishness, but that the ideas of evil forces, of Lucifer's and Satan's and hellacious notions of figures from underworlds that would drag and destroy man, they serve not just some psychological purpose, they serve in the same sense to represent, as I say, that gods and the idea of a supreme force does, and the first thing, the common denominator of all gods is always that they're unchanging. It is not a God that, a God's a God. Once you find the right one, he's always the same. He does not fool around. He tells you what the truth is or what the facts are, and that's it. He does not change, or he wouldn't be God. In the same way that I am telling you that that actually represents the higher level, the highest aspiration for that would be worthy of a real man if he knew what it was, and that is to stabilize his own nervous system at a higher level. Contraire withal, on the other hand, in conjunction with, dancing also tonight with, is the idea of anti-gods. That is, the bad forces, the evil forces, and what they represent is some explanation as to why man can't do it. Well, ask yourself. But now I'm sure all of you laugh at the idea in the Western world of a Lucifer, I assume you would, or a Satan hiding behind the podium here somewhere or just out of sight down the hall, this thing with horns, and that's good for Hollywood and fairy tales. I hope, for your sake. But that the idea that you would laugh, we'll assume now, of him being an actual figure. But now, how about this? How to explain the fact that all the way we'll assume from the best possible view that you know that when you can stop it all, when you can find that one piece in you and just simply hold your attention no matter what's going on, that you know and rather than just feel stupid and leave it at that as to why you only do it once every 5 years, what does stop you when you know it? When you know that this is what, for my own purpose, that I should be doing. I do this and everything else becomes moot. Everything else becomes clear. Everything else is answered. Everything else falls into place. Everything else takes care of itself right then. No fears, no nothing. It's it. It's what I should be doing. But then the question is, well, why? The wide range of ordinary people do use the ideas of evil spirits. It does serve that purpose. just to show you the range. That's not of any particular interest to us, but it does serve the range of ordinary people. They don't look at it in the matter of holding attention, but back to the idea of, well, why aren't you a Christian? Why aren't you a Jew? Why do you not live by the golden rule of the Ten Commandments or Buddha's Eightfold Path? And they say, I want to. I abide by all the physical rituals. I donate money. I light candles. I do all this. And you say, yeah, but why don't you do the rest of it? And even if an ordinary person tries to at first give you an excuse such as, well, none of us can. And if you tried to stop for a minute and say, well, are you telling me that physically, are you saying that there's something in you or that there's something about your body parts that makes it impossible for you to love your fellow man? I mean, are you saying that there's some kind of great spot somewhere on the back of your neck, or that there's some sort of wart under your armpit that we can't see, some kind of lump that makes it impossible? And they'd finally go, we'll assume that they got some traces of sanity left, and we'd go, well, no, I don't mean that. And if you say, well, in other words, there's not anything physiologically speaking to stop you from loving your fellow man, from loving someone who hates you. I mean, you can't say that there's something physical the same way that you let a rock go from your hand and it falls. Are you going to tell me that there's something like that in you that makes it impossible just because somebody comes up and doesn't seem to like you, that it just makes it a rule that you have to dislike them? You go, well, no, I can't say that. So what are they left with? There's got to be a reason. Now, the most simple being, Satan, Lucifer, anti-gods, the force of evil. Again, assuming that you are somewhat past that point and can smugly smile at it. Then, for all you SSers, smug smilers, then I'd have to ask you this on your own behalf. Then you can ask yourself rhetorically, well, since I don't believe in that, then what is my damn excuse? I guess we can be a bit more sophisticated. Instead of excuse, why can I not? What is there about being alive that you understand that it sure would be better if I wouldn't do that? And you continue to do that. There have been people who gave, I assume you know, but that have devoted by all reports, and I'm just giving you the reports as they come out in history without any comment, no editorial, but people who gave, by and large, their life to a mystical cause. Now, if they did it in some way that resembled a profitable approach, I'm telling you one more time what they were doing, whether they were reported to have sat in one position for 20 years without moving, or whether they walked around constantly trying to humble themselves, or that they, every time that they had one farthing, they would give to somebody. Of course, it was in Milwaukee, I assume they said, well, what the hell is a farthing? It's a little humor, see, here at the end to help some of you. A little humor helps nobody. They have attempted the true explanation that I'm giving you now. What they were all attempting to do was to remember, to be calm, to be deliberate, to hold that piece of awareness that you can, that it does not take any sort of magic. To say, well, can you do it? And people go, well, yeah. That sure is flip and easy to say, well, it doesn't take any magic to do it, because you go, well, no, it doesn't. And you think, well, why don't you do it? Then it gives a whole new definition to the idea of magic, because it would take a miracle. When you start looking at it, you think, well, it would take a miracle. It would take something completely beyond my understanding, beyond my grasp to do this. I mean, I can try like, what the hell was that? Man sitting, getting close to getting into a mystical, wow, did you hear that? Doesn't matter hear what. You either heard something physically, audibly, or you didn't. And you don't have to hear anything externally. You don't have to hear a radio. She told the old man, she said, well, you old fool, you don't need a talk radio station here in the new city. You brought your own mind, didn't you? What? What did you mean by that? And if you don't have a wife, you can sit home and look at the wall and go, God, I wish I had a wife, but I wonder what it'd be. You are plugged in, you are docked. For those of you, perhaps I didn't go into enough details having to do with science fiction. A great space station. And each little person like some little isolated individual space vehicle. But to stay alive, to survive, you have got to continually dock up. You've got to be plugged into this great source of energy, the mothership, the space station. We're talking about human intelligence, because you're already plugged in. You'll stay alive physically, but you get plugged in somewhere. It's the one place that you keep nourished by local conditions, and you can only plug into it. You got no choice. As soon as you got a mind, you're right off dumb. First thing, just as soon as you got an intellect and go, now I can think, then the first thing you are is dumb. I'd refer you back to the human intellect and residential Kempness from last time. Was by the time you move into the place, it's already untidy. Did anybody think that was actually about houses? By the time you get into your own mind, by the time that here you are, you're a human, and you're a little 4 or 5 year old, according to how slow or fast learner you were, and suddenly you're in your own mind. Those people out there, your parents, they talk to you, and you realize that you're inside, that you're a person, and there's something. And you go, Dada, Mama, and they have fits. Your intellect gets going. According to how you want to look at it, you're now in the garden for the first time. And the first thing, just as soon as you're there in the garden, you realize, well, I'm Eve, I'm Adam. I now have a mind. And as soon as you look around, there's peelings, garbage, ferns are kind of miced over, some of the leaves are falling off the trees. As soon as you get there, you can't move fast enough. By the time you move in, it is already unkempt. As soon as you plug into life, you've got no choice. As soon as you plug in to local conditions, as soon as you are intellectually ignited, if you have any potential, if there's anything extraordinarily potentially extraordinary in your genetic makeup, just almost as soon as you get plugged into life. I've described it other ways, but just almost as soon as you do, and you think, now I'm beginning, that you have some notion about what's going on with these other people, your parents, and these outsiders talking, and the intellect, your brain's going, and you feel like, now I'm alive. The would-be mystics of the world, just almost immediately, they go, wow! They go, something's wrong though. I mean, as much fun as this, they realize, wait a minute, they know immediately. Wait a minute, something's wrong. How do you explain it though? You end up all the way from, as I said, the most simplistic of the world, the simple-minded, the majority of humanity, who have no interest in these sorts of matters. Life does not drive them. Their explanation for anything untoward that they do, anything condemnable that they do, what do they say? Evil forces or subconscious traumas, the same thing. They are simply pointing out, hey, I cannot help it. Which don't laugh at, blame it on Satan or subconscious childhood traumas. They're telling the truth. As long as they throw in, I couldn't help it, the rest of it is just sort of window dressing. It's kind of to distract you. They say, I couldn't help it. It's from my childhood. They told the truth to start with, but it was too point blank. It was too blunt to say, well, I couldn't help it. That is not acceptable. That is anathema to civilization, to the general march of progress. You cannot have people saying that. Try it again. You remember the city. The little settlement that was just starting to get going, which is like a human nervous system, but it's this little settlement, you remember, and they had a sign that they put up that said, we are born what we are. But for that settlement, for that city, for that nervous system to grow, the sign had to go. It didn't say that the circumstances changed. It didn't say that they knew better. It didn't say that the sign was incorrect. But the sign had to go. You have to attribute. You have to say, well, I couldn't help it. But everybody knows that that's not a period. You didn't say I can't help it. If you said I can't help it, and nowadays under any modern civilized conditions say I can't help it, is simply, if you put a period there, it's an admission of insanity. It's an admission of being so far outside the mainstream that life's not going to deal with you. That is, other people are not going to deal with you in any manner resembling constructive. They're going to put you away. You're a criminal, you're criminally deranged, you are simply uncivilized. Because you do not say, you do not live under a sign that says, we're born what we are. If you do, they're going to put you away from everybody else. Because they know that something's wrong. You've got to say, well, I couldn't help it. If you say, well, why did you do so-and-so? Why did you say so-and-so? Why do you engage in this kind of activity? Well, I can't help it. And then at least say something like, and I'm not sure what it is in me even, which sounds like perhaps really a way out, but it's not. As long as you say, I can't help it, and then add something. To not be able to help it is the beginning. To be able to know that is the beginning. If I may re-quote either Solomon or, I guess it was Solomon, is the beginning of all wisdom. A true traveler knows when he has become stupid. He knows when he's reached a new level of winding roads and knows that I should be able to do better than this. But that is not actual stupidity. To say, well, I'm lost, I'm not sure, I'm uncertain where I am. Because it's only ordinary travelers, ordinary people who live life, that never know that. That's how you stay ordinary. That's how you do not ever get anywhere extraordinary. That is, be lost, stupid, uncertain, and not know it. And one way to also always know that you don't know it, I just told you, is if somebody says, you appear to be a little lost or confused, uncertain in life, and you go, well, yes, I am, but you don't have to hear the rest. You're saying, well, yeah, but I can't help it because.